make a short teaser. Okay, can I make a short teaser of your presentation today? Our discussion today is based on the very fundamental and deep article of Dr. Mridula Ghosh on the reception of Tagorean heritage in Ukraine. And I was curious to read the article, and I found a lot of very interesting facts I didn't know. For example, the variants of transliteration of Tagore's surname in Ukrainian literature are very, very varied. It's 18 different variants of transliteration of Tagore's name and surname. Yeah, amazing. Also, curious fact for me that Tagore was invited to Soviet Union in 1930 by the government, actually, and later on his interview was banned, like some schizophrenia of Soviet government, right? Soviet ideology in general. So I hope Dr. Mridula will elaborate on all these facts more in her speech, and I give her a platform now. Please.
Thank you. Thank you, Yulia, for giving me the word. And I'm very happy to see you all today in this event. And I would like to quickly mention and quickly make a presentation, which I will use, some slides just to capture your mind and attention, rather than, push you to thinking, differently. Just this is for orientation. This is not for any, do you see the screen?
Yes.
Okay. So I will now start the presentation now. As you see, we have mentioned, I'll show this part. This is the announcement. It has nothing to do. It is a Tagoreana in Ukraine. First of all, and it's organized within the scope of one of our projects, which is Ukraine and South Asia Open Dialogues, supported by the Renaissance Foundation. And of course, in cooperation with Archangel Krimsky Institute of Oriental Studies of the National Academy of Sciences of Ukraine. And Madam Yulia is representing Institute of Oriental Studies of the National Academy of Sciences, and we are very grateful for this cooperation. Tagore has been in Ukraine for a long time, but you will not hear about it in most academic writings, in most discussions. You will hear, of course, that, oh, of course, we know Tagore. Who is Tagore? From the very grassroots perception. And of course, everyone knows Tagore, but did anyone read it? Did people really deal with, Tagore's creations? That's most important for me. As both a carrier of Tagore's language in which he wrote, that's Bengali, and it is my mother tongue. And because I was also raised in one of the schools which was founded by the niece of Tagore, and I was raised in Brahmo traditions, which is Brahmo tradition. That is one of the things that I hold very dear to my heart. And I've been brought up in this tradition. I've been learning music or dances in all these traditions. And the Tagorean philosophy has, been with us, with most Bengalis. It cannot be separated. It is like a big banyan tree, as if, the banyan tree, which is overarching. It is so big, it's so fundamental. At the same time, I should say that without Tagore, really, you will not have a conception of modern India. Why I use the word Tagoreana? What does it mean? For Ukrainians, it will be very interesting to know that you have a similar word, that is Shevchenkiana, which means that, creations of Tagore, study of Tagore. There is another word expressing that is Tagoreznavstvo or Tagorean studies. But Tagoreana can be your creations, which you will do inspired by Tagore. In the same way, there were many people who were inspired by Taras Shevchenko, the national poet. And Tagore, of course, is also a revered person. I cannot say the national poet or not, because in India, we have, 22 state languages and a lot of things. So in each language, we have its literature, its history. Tagore is unparalleled because he is the first non-European Nobel laureate in literature, the first, and it happened in 1913. So what I'm going to speak about is how Tagore's fame was spread all around the world. I would briefly reflect on less known facts of Tagore's creativity. How is Tagore known as? He is known as a poet. People think of, different things, but I would say that the 2/3 of the contents of his works are socio-political, economic, social, educational, cultural, civilizational, and ecological. But of course, in his songs and verses, you will find a lot of philosophical thoughts, very deep philosophical thoughts, especially the treatise Gitanjali, which won the Nobel Prize for him 1913, as early as that. And it's very reflective and very humane. He was a world citizen, which means, it is very difficult to say that Tagore, we were not independent. Tagore was a subject of British India. British India, we were not having citizenship. We were subjects of an empire. We were a colony. Tagore lived all his life in non-independent India. But I can definitely say that there is no more independent person than Tagore ever. You can find the boldness, the depth of his works. So even if we live in an independent country like India, how independent are we in our creations? And that is a very significant question I ask myself. I would now start with what happened with the Ukrainian. Please, can you mute your microphone, please, Nirchar, because there are some sounds coming. Are you having questions? Thank you. The reception of Tagore is something very important in Ukraine. I will concentrate on Ukraine, but a little bit, I would like you to know that Indian literature and India were perceived before Tagore in Europe. That's, through Max Muller, through others, William Jones and many others, they translated they tried learning Sanskrit, they started little bit getting into it and trying to open or discover India for themselves. However, there was no opportunity of talking to Kalidasa. There was no opportunity to understand India in the way you can understand by talking to a living poet who is enjoying the Nobel Prize in literature. And, his presence just changed everything. I mean, from a far off colony, a British colony, a subject of that colony gets the Nobel Prize. It's something very, unimaginable. With almost the country has no status. It's not an independent country. So, and most intellectuals were extremely, extremely fascinated by the things he wrote, because his interpretation of the ancient philosophical ideas were much more important than mere translations. Mere translations of Bhagavad Gita, you can see there are a lot of mistakes, there are a lot of interpretations. But if you look at the Tagore takes the essence and spreads it around. He doesn't make it like overtly religious. Tagore's spirituality was not religious, and that's what is very important. He was a very tall, very good-looking individual with a long beard, with a long robe, and his appearance even made this kind of a wise mystic from the East. But in his writings, he was a very modern man. He was an extremely progressive and modern person. And Indology became a modern branch of studies, not just delving into the debris of these ancient things and trying to find out, which they will not be able to because it is very difficult. And there can be one interpretation only, but it is not the full interpretation. Therefore, Tagore's attempt was to make this human face of Indology. Indology attained a very different dimension. And India, from a concept, arose, it became a very different, the civilization, the values, it attained a very big response in that, 20th century Europe, a very progressive country. I mean, a culture which has so much to give to the world. So he put India on the pedestal long before we became independent. Now, Central and East Europe had a very specific context because we had a very, I would say that it has a decolonizing perspective. I dare say this because the Eastern Europeans were always having a different identity, a different perception. And in that, the Western Europe and Eastern Europe were a little bit different because there were, like, the Eastern Europeans did not think of this Tagore as an Oriental person, as a person from the Orient, which is a very Western concept, like it is the Western Orientalism, which treats it as the other, the other, someone else, and that is something that the management of the concept is driven by the West. But many people treated him also as a product of the West because he was a product of the Bengal Renaissance, which was interpreted as a westernized, Western educated, because therefore it is a westernized class, which is also a very wrong perception because Western education doesn't mean you become westernized, So the process doesn't always make a person totally change the person, enables the person to have a dialogue with the West, but it doesn't change the person. Now, what was the most important thing is that we have a lot of these experts who are today very respected ones, but the first translator of Tagore from original Bengali was Vincenz Lesny, a Czech, and he translated Tagore, and he wrote not Tagore as it is spelled in westernized form of his surname, but Thakur, which is the original. This word Thakur was mentioned, and in Prague, the capital of Czech Republic, we have a street called Thakurova Street. So this is very, very important. And I would like to say that please mute your microphone if you don't mind, because there can be sounds coming in. So Poland had also a lot of translators. And Poland, one of his plays called The Post Office was translated by 5 different translators. They were so fascinated. And we have, during the Second World War, this sad story of Janusz Korczak. He was in with the kids, and they performed the Post Office, the drama Post Office by Tagore. And of course, after that, they were taken to the concentration camp, unfortunately. And this history is very sad. I would say that the Balkan Peninsula also, each of these countries, when they were having the independence movements, they thought of Tagore as someone inspiring them to have their own identity and to realize, and they had their own spirit. So the other perception is from Hungary, Imre Banga, one of the top specialists on Tagore. He mentions it that, there were different perceptions in the same country because of change of regimes. Now, for Eastern Europeans, when you had the first part was the anti-colonial, the independence and the realization of the self. But after that, when you had the socialist revolutions, and then you had the state-designed Tagoreana. That is, the state decides what will be the format of Tagoreana, what will it be. So that had another aspect of, like, when we consider Ukraine, it would be pre-Soviet, Soviet, and post-Soviet. So these can be the stages. I would say that the split of the periods that I had mentioned is the first period is from 13, when Tagore wins the Nobel Prize, till 32. when Ukraine becomes a part of the Soviet Union. Or even I can mention 1930, maybe not 32. The periodization is not that strict by year and date, like a very cutoff date is this year. You can see the names of the translators, but you will hardly find, except maybe Pavlo Ticina and Ritter, you will not find all these names. And there may be many more names which are not available, which were never mentioned anywhere. So this is so very painful that Ukraine was a country where Tagore didn't come. He came to the Soviet Union in Moscow only. He was in Warsaw, he was in Budapest, he was in Sofia, he was in Bucharest, in all the East European countries. But he didn't travel to Ukraine, but that doesn't make him away from Ukraine. That doesn't make anything, because we have Latvia, we have Lithuanians, they have also made a lot of translations, and Tagore is a respected person in Latvia and in Lithuania. I would say the first translations were made by Yukhim Mikhailov. He made the Crescent Moon, which is called the Misechny Serb in Ukrainian, and the Yuri Siri. Yuri Siri is Tishenko. His pseudonym is Yuri Siri. You can see the year of their birth. He translated The Gardener. These are the first two Ukrainian. Of course, you will ask me, how did they translate? Most of the European translators, they used English or any other medium. But these people, they used English, French, or German as the medium, because the Russian translations were still done during this time. So the Russian translators also were using other European languages as medium. The only exception was Vincent Lesny, who knew Bengali. Now, later, there were people in other countries who started learning Bengali, and original translations came up. But the first of the translators, these first two names are important because they translated a full volume. Others, Mykola Holubets, Lototsky, Mykola Kovalchuk, of whom, we do not have any information. We just have some information, and people also sometimes write M or MK. And you don't know who did this translation. You have to assume, you have to go through the archives and study. And so it is extremely difficult to sometimes identify, but a lot of work is even further needed to systematize all this. My attempt was to make it into a short article, but I would attempt to make it into a bigger book, perhaps, because that would be more interesting. Yeah, and time and resources, and of course, you need strength for that. A big difference was Pavlo Ritter. Why these people were so much interested in Tagore? Because first of all, the first few names, they were in the west of Ukraine, and Pavlo Ritter was in Kyiv and also in Kharkiv, but they were able to communicate with the Western European elite and Western European people literature, or Eastern European people who were translating and who were the intellectuals. There was a free movement of intellectuals. And all of them, most of them, many of them could go and visit even Prague when Tagore was speaking. For example, there were people who wrote essays, like Professor Sofia Rusova, who was in Prague. She listened to his lectures, and then Oles Babi, he also wrote a lot of things. This is that Oles Babi who wrote the famous the national anthem of the Ukrainian nationalists, that Zrodili smo velikoj rodini, in Ukrainian. So these are those people who were very much at the helm of the Ukrainian independence movement. I would say that you hear Stavnichi, then, Yukhim Mikhailov was a painter. I mean, for each of them, I could speak for hours, but I don't have that time. I just want you to see, and perhaps I will share my essay with my writing, so you can read about them. I wrote in details as much as possible. Many of them had to suffer from Stalinist repression, and many of them died. Many of them had to emigrate, leave the country. Like Evgen Pluzhnik, he was a fantastic poet. He was inspired, he wrote a very interesting, he was so fascinated with Tagore, and the rhythm of the name Rabindranath Tagore was something that enchanted him like music. And he wrote a very, very simple and very interesting lyrical poem on a drizzle, in a drizzling day. I just look for my solace. I turn the pages of Tagore's work. Pavlo Ritter had a very sad life. He was arrested and then he died in incarceration. Then, of course, there were others like Lototsky, Kovalchuk, Rudnitsky. They also had to, some of them had to leave because Yuri Siri had to leave for the United States. Yukhim Mikhailov died. Then I would tell you that all of them had a very sad, not recognized. Contrast is Pavlo Ticina. Pavlo Ticina wrote very bold. He's one of the stellar figures of Ukrainian literature. But later on, he had some kind of a, in the beginning, he writes about a lot of interesting ideas in 1925, in 1920 about the famine. He wrote in very powerful verses. 1925, he addresses Tagore. Can you please mute yourself, please? Yeah. Then, I will tell you that these people were extremely important to be, these people were so bold in their search for understanding Tagore that their names could get better recognition. I believe with time we will have that. Not everybody translated Tagore, not everybody wrote poetry, but there were people who analyzed and who wrote a lot of essays and a lot of writings. Among them were Andrei Nikovsky, he wrote, and of course, Professor Sofia Rusova, I said she was very much interested in dealing with the educational aspects of Tagore, and Tagore was a doyen of educational reforms. And Sofia Rusova was representing the Drahomanov Pedagogical Institute, which was then located in Prague, in Czech Republic. And of course, we had Josafat Skruten, who himself was a clergy, a Christian clergy, and he almost associated Tagore with some kind of a god, some kind of a very, he had some godliness in it, not human, something very sacred, which was also something that Josafat Skruten says that he is not a Christian, but he has some very interesting image. However, I would say Ludmila Staricka-Chernyakivska, who suffered from repression, as you know, she was a very, very famous literary critic, very famous writer of Ukraine. And she wrote a critique of the Gardener, which was translated by Yuri Siri. It was excellent that she, without even understanding or knowing Bengali, she read it and she understood. She was very well versed in English and other languages. These were people, essentially, they were extremely educated people with knowledge of languages. And they were the cream of the intelligentsia of that time. And all of them, the appreciation was very important. But of course, there were people who were not so much appreciated because they were not understanding Tagore. To understand Tagore was also a very difficult thing. Now, until 32, this period was relatively free, even though we do not have a full picture of what happened. We need to still dig deep and find out. Here are a few portraits, but the portraits will cross others. From Pavlo Ritter, he knew Sanskrit and he studied Bengali. He's one of the topmost people who translated 6 to 8 verses of Tagore, and they were very interesting songs and from Gitanjali, from other places. And I would say he suffered from Stalin's repression and was one of the top Oriental studies experts in Ukraine. Now, the two first translators, Yuri Mikhailov's here, and this is Yuri Siri, who did The Gardener. And of course, the other two are modern, of our modern period, and unfortunately, they are not with us. This is Ivan Karapets. He was a famous music composer. He put 6 of Tagore's poems, translated by Victor Batyuk, whose photo you can see here, the top big diplomat. And so he put it to music, and those are played. One of the things is that, Tagore had his own music on his own verses, but at the same time, musical creations in the world also know that from Tagore's poems translated, they were put to music by independent music directors and composers. So that's also a very interesting contribution to Tagoreana. We cannot ignore that, because that is part of Tagore as they see it through music, through their music, the interpretation of it. So it enriches Tagoreana, definitely. I did not put photograph of all people, so just for these to just know. Now, the second period is very important. It could be that from the 30s till the end of the 50s, this 20 years. What did happen? You know, it was very interesting. Yulia little bit mentioned. Now, this is the period when basically it starts with Soviet Union, which then state takes over the control of creative space. You know, what is happening in the creative space? There is some kind of a surveillance, some kind of a orchestration by the state. What is bad, what is good, you know. So there is a line being drawn, you know. So the state, I wouldn't say at least interfere, but of course, if everything is under the control of the state, which it was, and so we do not have anything to do with, you know, you start writing something freely. Moscow is visited by Tagore. This was important. You will see a lot of now information and celebration about it. However, the Soviet authorities needed Tagore to visit Moscow to legitimize, because that was the critical period of recognition of, you know, Soviet Union. Soviet Union was not recognized after the Bolshevik Revolution of 1917. And by the 30s, they had massive civil war, massive bloodshed all over Ukraine, all over. It was a pandemonium. It was horrible. So by 30s, it was kind of an established state. People who lived here, people who will go to the archives will find out what a horrible time it was. Famine, there was massive killings of people. It was total chaos. However, when Tagore visits, he was shown the best, as you know. Yes, there were reforms that took place. After the Tsarist, you know, absolutism, definitely there was a different opening. He saw, you know, common people sitting in Bolshoi theater, which he would not find otherwise. So he was a little bit like the classless society, and all these kinds of things were told to him. He also met students. You will find a lot of photographs, which unfortunately I didn't produce today, but we can discuss, we can have more meetings on each of these things. But two things happened. One is he gives an interview to the paper Izvestia, which was a very famous paper, Russian paper, Soviet paper, not Pravda, but Izvestia. So Izvestia was the government paper and Pravda was the Communist Party paper. So these are two different things. That interview given in 1930 was not published until 1988. Can you imagine? When Gorbachev came, during Perestroika, that interview was published. So you can ask, how can that happen? Well, it happened, but this interview was published in Manchester Guardian. It was somehow sneaked out and it was published. So I'm putting just an excerpt from the book by Amartya Sen of The Argumentative Indian. So this is clear that what did Tagore really write? You know, Tagore really say, are you doing your ideal a service by arousing in the minds of those training anger, class hatred, and revengefulness against those whom you consider enemies? Freedom of mind is needed for the reception of truth, you know. Terror is hopeless, like for the sake of humanity, I hope you may never create a vicious force of violence which will go on weaving an interminable chain of violence and cruelty. You've tried to destroy many of the other evils of the Tsarist period. Why not try to destroy this one also? So you can imagine that Tagore could see through the problems of the regime, that you did a lot of, you know, good things, that you removed the class bias and all this of the Tsarist period. But why are you bringing new evils to replace those old evils? That was his message. Now, one of the other point is Tagore wrote travelogue. Wherever he went, he visited 31 countries during the span of his life on all continents. And everywhere he goes, he writes his travelogue. And to be honest, I must tell you that reading his travelogues, I tried understanding different countries. And that was that rose my interest in international relations. Tagore was master in understanding countries. Today's area study specialists, could perhaps read some travelogues of Tagore to understand the country from within. Like he travels to Japan, I started admiring Japan after reading Tagore's travelogue, sitting in the 80s or in the 90s in my college days. Like that, Tagore wrote his travelogue, Letter from Russia, Russia Chithi in Bengali. It was not published by the British because British Empire was against the Soviet Union. So after Tagore's return, it was not published. It was banned from publication. It couldn't be published in India. And of course, it was not published in Russia either. It was published with a lot of censorship in 1956. So it is after de-Stalinization that some kind of an appreciation, some kind of a reappreciation of Tagore starts. So the Stalinist period was really very brutal, although it started using Tagore as an anti-colonial and anti-imperialist leader for the sake of the public relations purposes, Now, you can see from 1929 to 1955, no books of Tagore were published in the USSR and also in Ukraine. So all these publications, people I mentioned in the previous slide, were before that, till the beginning of the 30s or even before that. So now post-World War II, what is happening is that Tagore's image is being carved by the socialist camp as an anti-imperialist poet who will serve the state ideology for East European people, not only Soviet Union. So that is dominant. We can see that in many places. And that is perhaps one of the reasons I will tell you that a reappreciation of Tagore today is getting difficult because he will be seen as, oh, the Soviets told him good things, So then he should go to the, trash bin. It's not really that. One has to really deal with this very delicate material. Now, post-Stalin, Thaw gave some new hopes, because the Sesvit is one of the journals. By the way, next year, it will be 100 years of Sesvit, one of the publications that really honored Tagore translations, extensively publishing it all the way. And it published all these translators who I mentioned. And in 1958, it started again publishing. 34, it was closed. It was not opened anymore because the Ukrainians should not have direct access to foreign literature. Because what was Sesvit doing? Sesvit was translating best literature from all over the world into Ukrainian languages without, not through Russian or not through censorship. So that was something that gave some hope. And Sesvit catalog is one of the things that will give you a lot of, I will just tell you, I have the catalog near me, but I'm going to show you that it has all these names. The third period, therefore, after 55, some kind of relaxation is coming. And 61 is the cutoff year when we have the Tagore Centenary. And Tagore Centenary, a volume of his works are published. So there's a very big activeness of publishing Tagore because it is a reappraisal of Tagore. And we have new names coming up, new people. Like most of the people are not with us today, but they were then young and it was the early 60s. And the movement of the 60s was an important thing because it was almost like a fresh breath of fresh air in Soviet and Ukrainian literature especially. Now you can see Sesvit also published Mikhailo Ignatenko, persons you do not know so much, but they lived till our times, till 2004, and Lesia or Olena Trebinska. She was a doctor by profession. Unfortunately, she translated from English. She read Tagore, beautiful translations, but the few that were published in Sesvit, otherwise, all her creations are lost because, she left her translation copies to someone and nobody knows where they are. So searching the archives will lead to they are lost. The manuscripts getting lost is another tragedy for, which cannot be found. One of the famous translator and poet, Grigori Kochur, Then we have Natalia Bilocerkivets. She's an established poetess. Grigori appreciated Tagore and wrote a very nice essay about him, which is fundamental in studying Tagore in Ukraine. And also Natalia Bilocerkivets, she writes an essay facing a person from the future. Like Tagore is giving us thoughts which will lead us to the future. Now, this loses censorship, but however, what we have is a tendentious Russification, because you cannot just write to your peers in other countries. You cannot communicate with your poets of other countries, which little bit of communication was there between the socialist country poets, but otherwise, you could not independently communicate. And so there were a lot of interesting stories about the Samizdat. Samizdat, was a makeshift makeshift kind of publication, handmade and, underground press, let me say underground. And so the essay nationalism, because this word was like very, the Soviet authorities were very afraid of it. So it was a taboo. And so the essay of Tagore, nationalism, which basically speaks why you should not be a nationalist and what are the red lines of nationalism. Basically, the book is about that, but that was very badly censored. Unfortunately, by looking at the cover of the book, people think it is all about making people nationalists, which is not. I would tell you that this is very funny to hear that Vyacheslav Chernovil, who was a famous Ukrainian leader, in his suitcase, this essay was found, and it was one of the reasons why later on in his during his arrest, this was one of the concepts that he is reading literature which is not proper, let's say. So Tagore enters into the lives of the dissidents. These are facts which are very difficult to find in open literature. And Les Tanyuk was one of those persons who I communicated personally with, and also with Victor Batyuk, and I had the great pleasure of talking to both of them. Les Tanyuk was a theatrical director, and he used his students from India and Bangladesh at the Theatre Institute in Moscow. He was teaching there. So he used to ask them to bring originals and explain. And so he made some Mikola Lukács, and he invited top writers to see the rehearsals of those plays, which he set with his students. And what he would say that I really want Ukrainian Tagoreana to develop. And for 30 years, his manuscript, he was not able to publish, because he was one of those who was he was a dissident, and he was like under the microscope. So he was not allowed to publish. Until 2001, he could publish his translations of the Gardner and many other works. He had made a big series of radio programs and he was a great actor. So he was teaching even actors mastery of acting. So he was reciting very well. And one of the Lit Fests, I remember in 2010, I was with him and he read out Tagore. It was wonderful to listen to him. So Les Tanyuk was also the Minister of Culture in independent Ukraine. He was also the deputy of the parliament. So that is also something that Ukrainians will know, and Ukrainians will be able to appreciate his work. Victor Batyuk is a legendary person. I met him when I was a student, and he was speaking pure Bengali. I could tell you that it was a very interesting circumstances that when I met him first, the Bengali he spoke usually is the high Bengali. Even Bengalis do not speak that refined Bengali. So he was the only person after Pavlo Ritter who translated Tagore from the originals. And I may say that he was the inspiration for me to learn Ukrainian. This is very personal aspect. I do not want to make it too personal, but unfortunately, he died in a car accident in 1996. I had regular communication with him because it is he who showed me how the censorship was affecting letter from Russia. He did the Ukrainian translation from Bengali original. He never translated Tagore from any other language, and he learned Bengali to read Tagore in original. That was what I asked him, why did you learn Bengali? Because, you know, he was trained to be a diplomat. He knew very good French, he knew English, and also he knew other languages, but this was his call that he will read Tagore in the original. In 1989, he traveled for the first time to India and in a Soviet Ukraine delegation. And many other dignitaries were speaking, like the minister or other people. But when Batyuk spoke in Bengali, I mean, a lot of people were just, you know, overwhelmed, and the clapping didn't stop. So that was something that we will always miss him, because had he lived, he would have contributed a lot. I know I'm now working on it. He has unpublished works, which we plan to publish within our Tagore Center. We are working on the manuscript. And this is another gentleman who also had the boldness to look through, to appreciate Tagore was his call. He was the first, do you see my screen really?
Yes.
Yes.
So then he was the first Ukrainian ambassador to the United Nations after independence, and then he was ambassador to Canada. And after that, he came back, and unfortunately, during that time, he died in a car crash in very slippery slopes of the Carpathian Mountains in a very cold, icy time of December. So that's the sad part of it. Now, what happens is 91, Ukraine gets independence. I already moved into this area with talking about Batyuk and Les Tanyuk. And range expands. You know, people are no more, you know, has to look at what the state will think, what they would tell us. Will they allow me to publish or not? And excuse me, many people started thinking of Tagore, they looked at also Shevchenko. There was a re-evaluation. And I find a lot of journalistic materials where Inna Dolzhenkova, in the paper Then and other places, they compare him, like Tagore is wearing the Ukrainian embroidered shirt, those kinds of things. And you read, that's fascinating material, how they try to compare, how they try to find out the similarities in their approaches and thoughts. Also, we find a very interesting person, Professor Volodymyr Vasilenko. He's the head of the Kirovograd. Now it is Horishny Plavny, it is called. So this is, he was the rector of the Pedagogical Academy. He wrote extensively on the pedagogy of nonviolence using Gandhi's model and Tagore's model, especially Tagore's model and Shantiniketan, the university he created. That book is very important in 2008. Now I would tell you that I was involved in helping a group of students in 1998 to compose Tasher Desh. And they were using it as their final degree, for their degree certification. They have to prepare something and stage the dance drama. So it was a very interesting experience. Ivan Karabits, I showed you the photo, who set music. It happened during this period. Also, we have a very popular singer, Ruslana Lizhichko, but she used the last poem, Shesher Kobita. There is a very interesting verse within that big poem that is translated into Russian. And of course, it was set to music, not Tagore's music, but it was set to music by Rybnikov. And it was a very famous, it was used in a very interesting Soviet film, and it was sung by a Uzbek group and many other artists. And so this was a very popular thing. About Rabindranath Tagore was made popular in different places of the Soviet Union even. So this song was sung by Ruslana, translated into Ukrainian. And of course, we set up the Tagore Center, that you can say one more thing. And the fifth period, I would say it is from the 2011, which is the 150th anniversary. Here you have a lot of things happening. But however, I have to still compile and show that they are little. They are very little. I would start from the last, that is Ludmila Kerkesha makes another version, Ukrainian version, a different one, not the Ruslana. Ruslana did it in 98 and she does it after 10 years, but it's a different version, and she makes the children's choir sing it. And we discover a very interesting personality, Paraska Plitka Horitsvit. She was an ethnographer. She had no education other than 4 classes, but she suffered. She was in jail in Siberia. Then she returned to Kazakhstan, and then she was brought back to Ukraine. She couldn't study more, but she extensively wrote on Tagore, and she studied. She loved India very much, and she wrote a tale where, the Hutsul tribe of the Hutsul people, it's a nationality, a sub-national group of the Ukrainians in the Carpathian Mountains, and how they traveled to India. It was her fantasy. Story. She wrote that she with her friend, they flew and they met the elephants, they met everything. So she illustrated and wrote a handwritten book. You could find almost like 80 to 100 handwritten books that she has left. And her house has been turned into a museum today. She had a great respect for Tagore, drawing his portraits, even at times, writing about Tagore, like a person from, who was not studied. She's a ethnographer without any education. I mean, people are studying him. She's called the Homer of Hutsulshina, which is Homer really knew the place where she lived, and people used to go to her to understand the land. I would say my friend, Olga Kolomiec, she researches on Indian music, and she also researches on ethnic music of different countries. And she did some research on Tagore music. She also wrote about Tagore music heritage and Shevchenko musical heritage. So, Shevchenko's poems have also been made into music. That's also a very important contribution. We had a very interesting book called, this one is called Tagore and Russia, you can see. In this book, this was published in 2016, joint publication from the 2 persons, Sergei Serebrany from the Russian University and Reba Som. And this book contains a chapter which we wrote, why Tagore should be studied in Ukraine. So we tried to pull together whatever was available those days. And we had also top people, attending the 2 events that happened in 2011 and 2016, of which Madam Yulia is witness as one of the experts of this Khanenko Oriental Museum of East Oriental Art. It was very important event because we had made this exhibition of paintings, of reproductions, and we visited afterwards a lot of other cities of Ukraine. More materials of journalism, yes, and starting from the BBC Ukraine to others, they start writing about Tagore. And I would also mention about people like Dmitro Pavlichko, Ivan Drach, Les Tanyuk, they started translating. I personally could help Dmitro Pavlichko in translating at least 6 verses. Unfortunately, he passed away in 2023, Drach passed away in 2018, and Les Tanyuk in I think it was also in 2017, he passed away. So these people are not with us, but they have left us with the creations that happened. This happened until 2022, although we had war that started in 2014. More and more realization came that you need to talk about Tagore more. Now, interesting is, in 2022, when we have the war, we have a publication by translation of The Religion of Man, Manusher Dharma, one of the most famous essays of Tagore by Leonid Pedan. Isn't that extremely important that during war, these things are getting published? And Vasil Gabor, this book, he drew on the Lviv archives and also attempt of an anthology. He made a systematized, and I got a lot of help from him to put together this article and other things. I know that there are still more materials which are available. So we prepared a bibliographic index of Tagore, and we have sent it to a place where everything is kept. What is the Tagore, what is Ukraine's contribution? And on plan, as I said, that we are trying to make, other publications and doing other things like till today. The work continues, we will do more. Now I will just jump into, I cannot, but just jump into a little bit of Tagore discussion, the anti-colonial aspect. Why this is important, because from 2022, the realization of Ukrainians has been that, they would be recolonized by Russia, if I can use that term, because, they were independent in 1991, but it didn't help, because now the fight is to very genocidal war, which wants to destroy Ukraine completely. And so the anti-colonial Tagore is very important. What did he do? He had enormous number of patriotic songs that started with the Bengal partition of 1905. Ultimately we got the partition, and now we have two different countries. Then the anthem, the national anthem of India, derives from the anthem he prepared. He wrote this anthem for the Indian National Congress session in 1911. Then another political anti-colonial act was the refusal of knighthood. He got the knighthood after getting the Nobel Prize, but he refused it because of the Jallianwala Bagh massacre, where almost more than 1,000 people were shot dead. Armless people were shot dead by the British police, the colonial police. He had a very interesting idea of creating a house called Mohajati Sadan on the north of Calcutta. It still exists, where people can come and discuss. It was a place where people can come, because you could not really gather. When, we had the British Empire, people didn't understand that there were a lot of restrictions also. You couldn't do everything. But he created that. He had some resources, all of them pulled together, and they set up Mahajati Sadan, which was one of the very important venue. And we have the opening ceremony takes place, and a lot of famous people join him. And this became a very interesting place for uniting activists, youth, and intellectuals. Often you will see a lot of photos of Tagore and Gandhi, and you will hear many things that, they were opposites. Yes, they were opposites, because Gandhi was having a different, very ascetic type of life. Tagore was different. Tagore liked appreciation. Tagore was an aesthetic. Tagore was a poet. He was different. But many things, he used to advise Gandhi. Gandhi used to seek his advice. So you can imagine, Tagore didn't want any political. Tagore was not a politician, but he could advise a top politician, who was Gandhi. Gandhi was the person who used nonviolence as a political tool in human history. Before, we had a lot of people professing nonviolence, but nonviolence in politics, using it as a political tool, was first done by Mahatma Gandhi. And he had a lot of dissensions with Ambedkar. Ambedkar was another very famous person and he was an economist, and he had made a big contribution to the Constitution of India, independent India. They had a lot of ideas which they had disagreement. But he reconciled. Tagore could reconcile him with Ambedkar. And of course, essentially the non-violence. Now, Tagore's coming out is one of the very important things is he's coming out in international politics. When he travels so many countries, what were his statements as a Nobel laureate? He could do a lot of things. He could help, he could do a lot of things. So you can see the number of activities I just jotted down. There could be more, but he did give speeches, and whenever there was war, he receives Nobel Prize in 1913, but then in 14 the war starts. So his life, he saw 2 world wars. I mean, the Second World War he saw, and he was extremely disappointed. His essays, Crisis of Civilization and the Religion of Man, clearly mentions those, the problems that is encompassing humanity during the Second World War, and unfortunately he died in 1940. So between that time, like in 1919, he joins the Roman Rolland's Declaration on the Freedom of Declaration of the Independence of the Mind, so which was something before the Versailles Treaty, which came into being after the First World War. Then criticism of fascist Italy. Even when he visits Moscow, he points out what are the problems of the Soviet regime. You had the Munich Agreement happening, which is taking Czechoslovakia. Hitler is swallowing Czechoslovakia. 30th of September, that is happening. And 2nd of October, he writes a poem, Atonement, in which he describes, what will be the consequences. And he clearly says that. So that is a very interesting political act. He's not a politician, but he did show his position. And of course, he was fascinated with Japan. He traveled to Japan 2 times. But when Japan attacked China, he criticized. He had the boldness of that. So these are his thoughts on world politics was very important. Now I come to the most important thing is nature and the human harmony. What attracted him, the major things of his projects were like setting up the university, but he was interested not only in discussing, art and artistic things. He was interested essentially in rural development, farms, and agrarian science and technology. He sent his son to Illinois University to study that, and he went with him even. And so when they came back, they had the Sriniketan and other agrarian science and technology. He realized that the rural India should be developed because rural India is the face of India and rural development is most important. Through all his works, he had a very special place for women, like even Shevchenko has. Shevchenko has understood the suffering of the women, the gender-based violence and other things. And you will find a lot of interesting thoughts of Tagore in each of his writings about women, which is very, very important. It's not just about the beauty of women or the softness. He lost his mother very early, and he always yearned for, his poems are extremely, extremely important. I've not read anything better, anything better I cannot find to express. So the poetic world and the material world, and he tried to shape it up and to improve human dignity. That is where he found, but not at the cost of nature, but uniting with nature. One of the things that struck him was school. In his childhood, he didn't like school because he said the schools are like preparing us for slaves, to become slaves. It should not enslave our souls, but it should open us up. So he set up Shantiniketan. This is one of the universities in 1901. This is the first independent private university in the world. He was not a Nobel laureate then. He did it because he thought it is necessary on the basis of a family estate. And he prepared this new concept of education because he saw that we are preparing slaves for the British Empire, basically. People will become slaves, sitting in those schools, learning the curriculum and all that. So his ideas of education was to liberate the soul, not enslave the soul. And in this, he found that the dialogue of cultures will be so important, that you have communication with other countries, other cultures. That will open up your soul. He brought professors from all over the world. And after he became, he brought people from, that is how he came to know Lesny. And Lesny spent some time, Vincent Lesny of the Czech Republic. So he came to Shantiniketan, many other people. And they studied Bengali. There were people studying Sanskrit. And this is the first university in India which had a Chinese professor teaching Chinese, the China Bhavan. He thought that that culture should be studied. And it is a very different idea than we have today. This Vishwa Bharati, what is Vishwa is world, Vishwa Bharati, this is a world university. So it should bring people from all over the world. In fact, the word university derives from universe, It should be from all over the world. And many eminent people also studied there. And many, at least I would say Amartya Sen hails from this place. Many top literature experts, top people studied in Shantiniketan University. And it's a fantastic place. I put the map of the campus, the map of the whole place. So this is Sriniketan and Shantiniketan, the two places. And it's a beautiful setting where, we had students learning under the trees. It's not possible. People laugh at me when I say this because they say, oh, in our weather, when we have snow, we cannot study outside. No, the problem is not mechanically outside, but it is the form, the idea of perceiving that, you should have freedom, it should be free. So that was the concept basically. And of course, it is better to breathe fresh air and learn. So under open air, there are a lot of workshops and other things being held today. I would just end with, two such very interesting quotes. Quotes are, millions of quotes are there. So, you know, we have one is the hammer strokes, but dance of the weather on the pebble. So that makes them, you know, if you break the pebble with a hammer, that's a different thing. And so how to shape. So you can see how soft treatment is always better for nurturing the soul. And the other thing is that if you have learned to become a doctor, you should not push your children to be the same. Let them choose what they are, because they are born in a different time and they have their right to develop. So I think, you know, with this, I would end. And it has been quite some time, and I would like to, you know, have a good discussion, if you may. So if you have questions, please.
Yes, may I ask you?
Yeah, sure.
Dear
Sure.
Mridula, yes, very interesting your your story. It's I think I agree with you that it's very great poet for world culture. I think it's interesting, the poet and great writer. But what for your consideration? Which poetic works of this great writer reflect the Bengali culture more vividly, please?
Okay.
If it's possible, answer.
Yeah, thank you, Professor, for asking me this question. I would say, to talk about Bengali culture, he has a lot of poems. He has thousands of poems, and some of the books, you know, there is one called Kotha o Kahini, which if you find in, you know, words and stories, that's how it could be translated. That is a very interesting work, which will make us, you know, understand through different incidents that you can find in happening at that time. Gitanjali is very spiritual. That will give you a total idea about what is happening in. That will give you an idea of the philosophical heritage of India in general, not just Bengali. Short stories are very important. And of course, he had a lot of these small little verses, small little rhymes, even for children. So he did design an alphabet book for children, which I learned my alphabet through that. It is called Easy Reader, Shohoj Path, which is called Easy Reader. And that's how I learned Bengali. And when I taught Bengali to one of the groups that we had, so we used the same book. So it's a lovely way to learn. So he uses the little rhymes of children. And for children, he has a special segment of children's literature, so which you learn from Tagore in books, in school books, especially for them. I don't know how much he created. You know, I used to think when I was a child that he was always sitting and writing, because how people can write so much that you cannot finish reading in one lifetime, honestly. So in many places, it's not only one book, but I will try to make a bibliography and give, if you have in English, you know, which are translated in English. I will give you the name of a portal which exists, you know, where you have everything you can download and read. They have made it today. So I will share that with you, so you can find out whatever you want, you know, to your taste. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you. Yes.
Thank
Yes.
you. Thank you.
Larissa?
Yeah, please.
Oh, thank you very much. It was so rich presentation, and I'm happy that I choose to be presented in on your presentation. Actually, I've learned a lot from this book, from Amartya Sen, Home in the World,
Okay.
and
Yes.
it's a lot of yes, it's a lot of facts which Amartya confirm as a friend of the of Tagore, and but I have a very provocative question. One of question. Actually, I spoke with a lot of Indian fellow here. Currently, I'm in Cambridge, and a lot of Indian fellow discuss Tagore heritage and influence, and they suddenly said me a very interesting thing about Tagore. Tagore is so fundamental, is so a focal point of Indian culture that everything developing and rising in the shadow of Tagore. It's not possible to overcome Tagore. It's not possible to do something outside Tagore because Tagore is everywhere. It's something really, he's absolutely phenomenal. So I would like to launch this discussion. What do you think a life outside Tagore? So does it possible to make some alternatives, or Tagore is just a, it's a fact which cannot be, overcome and, under any conditions. So what is your impression?
Well, to be very specific, there are millions of people who do not know Tagore. People who are not learned, people who are not educated, they have not read Tagore. But what they do, they will put before a photograph of Tagore and they will try to worship. They will try to say, because I have not read. So many people, even before he won the Nobel Prize, his songs were sung everywhere. People didn't know who wrote them. People didn't know because they were like popular folk songs they became, so that those songs were sung everywhere until they came to know that this is something that Tagore wrote because, they were so popular. Tagore had a very interesting life. He did not expect. He just says, what life gave me, I took it. He didn't want to be that famous, but it so happened, So this is a realization that if somebody can become a better creator than Tagore, well, is that possible? Is that at all possible? I don't think so, because my existence is very much related to Tagore. I was brought up. I cannot imagine my life without Tagore. But at the same time, I do not just all the time talk about him. I have a life which I do not use Tagore. For example, when I'm teaching to students or other technical things. If you think of Tagore as guiding your spirituality, guiding not religiously, but spirituality has a different meaning for Tagore. It's non-religious spirituality, which is very important. In fact, there will be people who will have a revolt against Tagore, and the post-Tagorean Bengali literature, there are people, but however, they all acknowledge. I will tell you, Nazrul Islam is one of those poets who is another stellar figure. He respected Tagore so much, and Tagore loved him as his junior. But, they were all influenced by him. All the further poets, the modern ones even, the modern ones, I haven't seen poets who will be not paying respect. But at the same time, you will read their poetry also. I will read others' poetry and I'll try to evaluate them, because poetry lives on, it doesn't mean Tagore interferes. No, Tagore influences. Tagore can inspire, but Tagore doesn't interfere. Creativity is freedom and creativity is open. So anyone can write and create. Tagore will not be able to stop that. So, but till today, Tagore is someone who is more than an overarching figure. I would ask you to also read this, I would say, this book is very important, The Argumentative Indian, if you find, of Amartya Sen, if you find that. Also, please view the films made by Satyajit Ray and this Home and the World, which you are reading. That is translated by Victor Batyuk and it is lying with me unpublished. So that is a very interesting book. The Home and the World basically develops, what the colonial period and the tensions between people. It's very, very interesting story. It has been made into a film. I would ask everyone to watch that film, The Home and the World. Yeah, very interesting. So could I answer your question? I'm not sure. Okay.
I thought Yachad, Mr. Mukherjee, wanted to say something, no?
Yeah, okay.
No. I didn't raise my hand. It's like just
Okay.
by mistake, I tapped.
No, it's okay. If you want to
like.
ask any
Okay.
question, you may, please.
Yeah.
No, okay. Ma'am, I heard that that Tagore gave an advice to Gandhi regarding uh, reconciliation with Dr. Ambedkar. Uh,
Yes,
can you like later on? Can you give me some scholarly sources regarding that?
sure, I
Because
will.
because recently I published an article where I dealt with the Gandhi Ambedkar debate and how it is relevant for the proper thriving of a modern democracy. Now, I apologize that I was oblivious of the fact that Rabindranath Tagore actually gave advice to Gandhiji regarding reconciliation with Ambedkar. I would like to study it in detail. Okay, so other than that, I don't really have many questions. It's just that I wish everyone in Ukraine all the best in such tiring situations. And I'm sorry that I'm in my college at the moment
Okay, it's
because
okay.
here Saturdays are working days. So okay, all the best.
Thank you.
Like
Thank
all
you.
my
Thank you.
best wishes.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Okay, any more questions or comments? Maybe comments even.
I have a lot of questions, but
Please,
I don't want
please.
to say.
You're welcome. You're welcome, please.
Yeah.
You're welcome. Yeah.
Maybe I will start with a question about this fundamental monograph by Vasil Gabar, right? I wonder whether this volume embrace everything, or what this volume missed, which work is waiting for us, yeah, because looks like it's very fundamental work, yeah, but what else we can do for deeper research of this topic?
Look, it is just written proba anthology. It's an attempt of an anthology. He never says that he could get everything. But he says that first 30 years of the 20th century, that time which was not covered by the Soviet Union, okay, that Ukraine, he is covering only that, not beyond, okay. So my attempt was to take whatever I could from this book, but I also have other unpublished works which I'm working on and which did not enter this article because there are more, So the question is that when time comes, we will always find out more works, We cannot have everything, then after 20 years, maybe somebody else will find out something. So they will all add up to it. So it's an inventory that he made. He said that, Rabindranath Tagore in Ukrainian literary discourse during the first 30 years of the 20th century. That's how the book reads. And it's an attempt of anthology. Well, there are some serious typos, which I pointed out, and he tried to correct it. But this, that he was writing Petro Ritter instead of Pavlo Ritter, for example, there were such typos. But otherwise, he reproduced some and did some compilation. But if this compilation can be used, or it is made, I would propose to widen it with the ones which are not entering, and then to include all the others which I have mentioned afterwards, until today. Then it may be a 2-3 volume or 4-volume work. So if we include everything that is related to Tagore, it will be a lot. Like if you include music, if you include essays, it's not about just translating Tagore. If it is Tagoreana, it will require a lot of work for a couple of years at least to find out and compile and to analyze, of course. So, but I think I could start with Batyuk because that's from the original. I would prefer doing that. Ritter, we have whatever Ritter did. Everyone has it. So Ritter couldn't do much because he had very less time, unfortunately. But Ritter is known. Ritter is well known in the, in his days. Scholars and academicians knew about him, so it was very important. What else we can do is to engage in such round tables, engage in discussions. For example, I wanted to show, but I don't know if I can now to show, I wanted to show the, the paintings of Tagore, but I think I cannot because time is very less, and I think I would better, next time. The paintings of Tagore is another topic, which is absolutely, Tagore started painting when he was 68 years old. He started painting and he left thousands of paintings, which is also scattered all over the world. Not everything is in original. A lot of copies are there. We have compiled, I think, 65 of them. We have an exhibition. So that is one of the topics that is a different thing. Tagore's music, another very serious aspect, which is 3,000 musical notes and 3,500 musical pieces. So that's itself a genre in our music. Another very fundamental work for musicians to deal with art, music, and then of course the writings, prose writings, essay writings, critique. I have the volume of Tagore at home, the originals, so I don't know if I will have enough time to finish all of it in as much detail as I should, So, but also the Sesvit archives, the archives need to be systematized, and then we have the bibliographic index. I think slowly we will try to do everything, and with your help, maybe with Institute of Oriental Studies help, that I will really appreciate.
More questions from audience? Because I can occupy all the time of questions, please.
Yeah, if you have questions, please. No, it seems nobody has questions. Maybe Yuri, you have questions, no?
No, yet. Thank you very much for your brilliant report. Very detailed, very, very detailed.
Not very detailed, honestly,
For me, absolutely.
I made it as crash as possible because for Tagore, I have about 17 different presentations, and I took one from there, think of something. So, I mean, all the 17 presentations, I cannot make it in 1 hour. I have different topics and different presentations. So on music, one, on paintings, another, then on his philosophy, one, then on his spiritual ideas, another. So we can have on topics, on topics we can think of doing things, on poetics, another, on the role of women, another, lot of things on how to bring up children, another, lot of these things.
May I ask a question which I guess will be interested to Pan Yuri, Yuri Zagorodny. How do you think the fact that Pavlo Ritter met Pavlo Tyczyna is the fact actually, or it's kind of guesses, our guesses?
I wrote about it, I wrote about it in the article, that there was Yuri Lavrinenko, who was very close to both of them, and he writes about it, that this was mentioned, that they met when everyone was evacuated to Kharkiv, from I think 23 to 1934, Tyczyna lived in Kharkiv because that was the capital of Soviet Ukraine, and Ritter was there, and they were communicating, about which, there were cases that Yuri Lavrinenko writes about it, and there is one Doctor of Sciences of the Academy Institute of Literature, Roxana Kharchuk, who also writes about it, that they met, and definitely I asked the Tyczyna Museum, yes, they gave me quite serious, because I verified everything, and that they met. And it is because of that Ritter gave him the opening of the Sanskrit and the original Bengali. So you can see, if you go to the Tyczyna Museum, you will see Tagore's portrait in the place he used to sit and write. He has Tagore's books. A lot of things are there with Tyczyna. Ticina is a very interesting personality to be discovered. And Sonechny Klarneti, this, sun clarinets, his book of verse, very famous one, was an inspiration from Gitanjali.
Yeah, thank you. Okay, I have a lot of questions, but maybe the last one, because I understand that we are here for a long time, and it's maybe it's time to finish. But I wonder how Victor Batyuk learned Bengali on such a high level. What was his education? Yeah.
I will share with you, I think you have it, one of my articles on Batyuk. Batyuk studied in Moscow in the Institute of International Relations, and his teacher was Alexander Gnatyuk Danilchuk, one of the famous Tagore scholars in the former Soviet Union. He was an Ukrainian by birth. He was in Moscow. He died in 2006. He lived for a long time. He was his professor. And I met Gnatyuk Danilchuk in Kolkata when I was a student. And I remember the Bengali he spoke. I mean, it was classical Bengali. So he was Batyuk's teacher. I never knew after that. I never saw him after that. But he was a professor of Sanskrit and Bengali in Moscow. And he, later also, he did a lot of work on Ramakrishna and Vivekananda.
I see.
This Gnatyuk Danilchuk was the person who taught Batyuk Bengali, because he studied, he academically studied Bengali.
Yeah, now it's clear. And the last question, Mridula, maybe it's not correct question at all, but still I wonder, the mythology around Tagore in India is universal Indian or Bengali, Bengalian more?
No, the Tagore's image definitely is more appealing to Bengalis, because, it is like Shevchenko. Shevchenko appeals mostly to Ukrainian because he wrote in Ukrainian. Tagore wrote in Bengali, but he also wrote in English. He wrote a lot in English. But Tagore got this Nobel Prize, the international recognition, his translations everywhere. So even if you are not a Bengali, when you go abroad or you present yourself as an Indian, you know who is the only, until today, Nobel laureate of literature. We never had any more. It was only Tagore who got the Nobel Prize in literature. So the fact remains that you have to accept him even if you are not a Bengali. For Bengalis, he is someone your own, like a relative. Okay. But for all others, and for every child singing Jana Gana Mana, our national anthem, everybody knows it is written by Tagore and music is by Tagore. So every time the soldier marches, every time the president, the prime minister speaks, or anything official happens, you have the national anthem being played, and you must know the words, and the words are in Bengali, and they are written in Bengali. So it's the national anthem of India. And also for Bangladesh, it's one of Amar Shonar Bangla, which is the anthem. So Tagore is someone, he hasn't usurped the space, but he was taken because he didn't write it to be the national anthem. They took his poem, they took this song to become. He was not alive when it was made into a national anthem. He died in 1940, and national anthem became the national anthem in 1947. And Bangladesh made its national anthem only in 1971. So, they could not find anything else. They only looked at Tagore's poems to find out something from there. He's got a lot of patriotic poems about Bengal, about India, a lot of them. So, I would say that if people need to understand Tagore, of course, it might not sound so universal that reading translations is not enough. You need to learn Bengali. Yeah, then the beauty is completely different. It is a different it's a different world altogether. Translation is, half of it is lost. Yeah.
Thank you. More questions?
Well, I don't think we have more questions. So
Okay, just to finish, I really strongly recommend our public to read your article, Dr. Mridula. Yeah, it's free PDF, is accessible on the site of the Oriental World Journal. So it's easy to read it in English.
What I could do is I can send by chat. Anyone wants to have
please,
it by
if
chat?
you can, or I can do it also.
No, I have it open, you know, I have it open.
Okay,
so
please.
let me just send it by chat if possible. I have to wait for 2 minutes just, you know, because I have to find it out and then send by chat.
But I can do it right now.
Sorry?
Please.
I can do it right now. I have this link.
Yeah.
You have the link, okay.
Yeah, please. Here.
Okay, thank you. Do you have the link to Batyuk also? No, Batyuk
No,
maybe
it's your last article.
Okay.
Thanks for joining us.
Thank
For
you.
participation. Yeah.
Thank you, Yulia, for the moderating, and thank you for all your help. So we wish to see you again. Maybe we will have a poetic evening. We had with Rumi, Tagore, and Khalil Gibran, you know, uniting them. So we could have a poetic study or something. And so I look forward to Yulia for proposals also. Okay.
Yeah, we'll do it. We'll think about it. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. See you later.
Yeah.
Thank you. It was
Nice
fascinating.
weekend.
Thank you very
Nice
much.
weekend.
Bye. Have a nice day. Peaceful, sunny day. Bye.
Bye-bye.